Welcome to FDA Imports, cross-border compliance with attorney Benjamin L. England.
Hello and welcome to FDA Imports, cross-border compliance with attorney Benjamin L. England. Benjamin is a seasoned attorney and founder of FDAImports.com, where he helps businesses navigate the often confusing world of FDA regulations and international trade compliance. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about some things that are in the news and just sort of the FDA in general and some various aspects that Ben can speak to. Ben, welcome back. Great to have you.
Good to see you, Kevin. Glad to be here.
So there's news about stuff happening in the world, and we hear this word tariff all the time. I'd love to know, we talked about them a little bit in the past, but can you give us an update? What's going on, what you're seeing?
So sure, there's been a lot of activity on the FDA and customs regulated space. You may have heard that Trump has instructed various agencies to conduct investigations and to determine whether or not there's any sort of like economic security reason to, with respect to pharmaceuticals being more expensive in the United States than in other countries, right? So there's sort of like an economic security argument that's being made there. And so there's that investigation that's going on. The other thing is now the most favored nation treatment of countries that ordinarily would enjoy a very low tariff rate can lose that with respect to pharmaceuticals if there's evidence that the pharmaceuticals that are being brought into the United States are valued higher than those pharmaceuticals are sold in the country from which they're coming. And there can be a substantial tariff on those goods. So much so that Customs has actually warned pharmaceutical companies, make sure you put the right true value of the goods. Don't start undervaluing the goods in order to avoid the appearance that those goods are actually going to be of closer in line with the price in other countries. So Customs is pretty active in terms of the pharmaceutical space right now, which is pretty important. The other big thing I would say is that everybody is breathing a bit of a sigh of relief, given that the China-U.S. postures have become a little bit less aggressive, resulting in U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods dropping from 145 to 30%. And you'll remember that they were lower than that before all this started, and 10s and 20s. And so now they're 30, and everybody's applauding. Everybody's happy that they're 30. Well, that's higher than they were when we started. So that's, I mentioned during another podcast, that's the raising sort of the floor. But that's not just it, right? So the 30% represents one aspect of duty collected on Chinese goods coming into the United States. There are others as well. There are what are called the 301 tariffs. These were tariffs that were put on Chinese goods, many Chinese goods, different commodities, during the first Trump administration that Biden did not lift. These were like anywhere from 7.5% to 25% based upon intellectual property violations and all sorts of other reasons why the Chinese government was subsidizing certain industries. And so these tariffs were levied on Chinese goods. Those still exist, and they're on top of the 30%. So if you have a 301 tariff for your goods at 25%, then you now have 55% because you have 30% plus the 25. Another big area has to do with goods coming through the postal system. A lot of small packages, they may come in through FedEx or UPS or some of the private carriers, but many of them come through the Postal Service, the International Postage System. And when they come into the U.S., those products historically are coming through a system that's not electronically monitored. It's mostly a paper-based system. So one of the things that Customs did in response to President Trump's instructions, mandate, was to tighten up, do away with inappropriate reliance on the de minimis rule. That's the goods under $800 are duty-free as long as you meet some conditions. For instance, the goods are being imported for personal use. They're not for commercial use. They're not to be resold. They're less than $800, and it comes in without duty. Well, that's what a lot of these Chinese product sellers were using to not pay tariffs of goods coming in. Well, so that's changing. Now goods that are coming through the postal system, they have a built-in added tariff if it's coming from China. It's a postal tariff. And it can be 54%. Now that's on top of the 30, and it's on top of the 25. Mm-hmm. So this is Trump and Customs going after the industry that has been, they would argue, abusing the de minimis rule. And the other thing is there's a mandatory now $100 handling fee to ship things by postal service into the United States because they have to put bodies on that cargo and actually examine the cargo. So there's a lot. So what might have cost you $20 to buy could cost you landed $140. So that's significant, right? And interestingly enough, it's going after that de minimis space, and that is notoriously known for a space where people have avoided paying tariffs that probably they should have. Right? We call that evasion, because they're bringing in small loads that are intended for commercial use. They're being commercialized. They're being sold to other people in the United States, and they were using the 800 rule in order to avoid paying duty on it. And that's what that's one of the issues that they've been really enforcing the rules, tightening up, and then enforcing those tightened rules.
We've talked about before leadership shakeups at the FDA. What are the practical implications for medical device, drug, and food importers?
Delay. My experiences in the last month or so is that there's been a long delay in getting the agency to respond to substantive questions or challenges with respect to fact or law or procedure or policy, application of a particular law, challenging the FDA's action. There's been significant delays, and the other place where I have one of the reasons I think that's true actually has nothing to do with Trump and nothing to do with tariffs and nothing to do with RFK shaking things up. Last year, under the Biden administration, there was a reorganization that was undertaken at the Food and Drug Administration, purportedly due to the circumstances that led ultimately to a shortage in infant formula in the United States, and it was sort of an excuse to do a reorganization. One of the things they did was and I think I've talked about this before, is that they changed the Office of Regulatory Affairs into the Office of Inspections and Investigations, or Investigation and Inspections. What used to be ORA is now OII, and it matters because ORA has compliance officers. Compliance officers are the people who the inspectors bring the facts back to, and who they engage, and the compliance officer engages with the importers or engages with companies. They're the ones that write warning letters. They're the ones that recommend regulatory action, and they do it in the field because they've been in the field for so long. They know what circumstances warrant regulatory action. And so they would recommend cases that would go up to the centers, Center for Foods or Center for Drugs or Center for Devices, who would perhaps have a policy review to it, or maybe a regulatory review, and then a decision would be made. But a lot of times the field they had the authority to take the action, and they did. That also meant that they had the authority to exercise discretion, right? So I could go to a compliance officer and I could say, look, I understand technically this product is in violation because it's misbranded because the net quantity statement's too small. Okay, who's hurt? Right? Nobody's hurt. Yes, you can refuse the cargo. It's misbranded. But do you really want to do that? Here's what I'm proposing. Here's the label we're going to put on the next run, not the next shipment, because the next shipment's already on the water and it's got this label. Right. So I can't do anything about that one. But before we make the next manufacturing run, we're going to use this label. And the compliance officer had the authority to decide that. Well, it seems to me that they've lost that authority. Because they're no longer the Office of Regulatory Affairs. Their job is to make sure that the procedures are followed, but they're not really given the authority anymore to render judgment about
use their best judgment.
Bad problem. But now everything goes to headquarters. So now you have a reduction in force and everything going to headquarters. It's compounded the problem of getting the agency to make decisions. Mm-hmm. So I would say delay is the biggest thing. In the drug space, most of what the Center for Drugs does, separate from compliance, right? Inspections and those kinds of things, where the field does the inspection, but the Center for Drugs participates in the regulatory action related to an inspection, a warning letter or a seizure or a recall or something like that. The Center for Drugs does that, but the majority of what the Center for Drugs does is review and evaluate data for approval of drugs. And that work is covered by user fees. It's not covered by discretionary funding. So the industry actually pays those fees. And the proposed budget that Trump has put forward, or the Republicans have actually put forward to the Senate out of the House, calls for an increased level of user fees. So there's not a whole lot of delay on the issues on the review side for drugs, applications. That's true for medical devices also, because those are user fee driven. So I would say that you have sort of less issues in terms of approvals and review of data for the purposes of approvals. Not so much delay there, not so much impact. The other place we see it is in the Freedom of Information Act group, all right, in the agency. So this is the place when you say, I have a right to get certain information, and you write a letter and demand information under the Freedom of Information Act. A lot of those people don't work there anymore. And they consolidated those functions into like one place. And I think it's in the department. Like, I think they still have some people at the FDA, but FDA was notoriously terrible when it came to being responsive to FOIA requests. And now they're just even worse. So I've seen a significant delay in terms of getting getting responses from the government under FOIA. That's what I see, I think, primarily on the FDA side. Customs is getting a bump in terms of their resources, so I don't think you're not going to see a lot of that. Obviously, they're in Homeland Security, and Homeland Security also has ICE, and it has the border patrols. So there's plenty of money, I think, that's going to be expected to go that direction, which is going to keep them busy.
How do regulatory uncertainty and enforcement slowdowns affect your clients' ability to stay compliant and operational?
What it impacts them is their bottom line and not being able to move cargo. Right, cargo gets locked up, and sometimes companies become nervous about bringing the next shipment in if the first one gets jammed up. And I've told them, I wouldn't do that. I would bring the next one in probably sooner rather than later, because this one may take a while. The only time where that might not apply would be if the FDA has sampled product, and we're waiting for the lab results. FDA will sometimes hold the next shipment until the results from the first shipment are completed. But if it has to do with them, just reviewing something related to a label or registration, and it's a different product or it's coming from a different manufacturer, then I would encourage them, no, you got to get your inventory in here, because this could take a little time. So it's mostly the other thing is the government they're making charges and detaining and stopping cargo on things I've never seen them do before, things that just have never sort of mattered to them in many respects. I mean, they're relevant. I mean, they're legal requirements, but FDA's never really spent a lot of time, looking at the minute details with respect to labels, and we see a lot more of that.
Is that a good thing in your mind?
Well, I think that it depends upon what the issue is. I use the example of a net quantity statement sort of on purpose because it seems silly, right?
Yeah, that's silly. Yeah,
but at the same time, it's important to know if the nutrition facts that are being declared on your label are accurate. That's important to know. It's important to know whether or not there's there's coloring in your food, because some people are allergic to it. That's a big change. I think there's a lot of talk in the industry and the agency about how they're going to resolve this coloring issue, the highly processed goods, the chemical components that are added to food for functional purposes, and all of that, I think, is going to take time to shake out, like months and months, and probably a year or two for those policies to shake out. The easy ones they can hit quickly, like some of the red dyes, is a good example. They're able to do that pretty quickly because a lot of people were calling for it for a lot of different reasons, and other countries had already hit on it anyway. Yeah,
we've been hearing about that for years.
Exactly. So is it good? Yeah, I mean, look, it is good. I mean, it's the fact is that the consumer is you can't go to a buyer beware approach with the Food and Drug Administration's regulated products, because the fact of the matter is the buyer doesn't have enough information in order to beware.
Right.
And so the government plays a role here that even I think people that would ordinarily be opposed to government regulation, for the most part, realize that the consumer doesn't have any way to know whether or not the ingredients are going to hurt them, and the government needs to step into that.
Yeah, we talked tariffs, we talked FDA, we talked a lot of different stuff. Are there any particular headlines, stories, how things are going to play out that you're watching closely that you think importers and exporters should pay particular attention to right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in the FDA side, it's going to be what's going to happen with peptides. There's a lot of movement of the agency. It's sort of addressing, thinking about, I'm not talking about the injectables like the semaglutides and liraglutides that are used in prescription drugs that are the injectables, but I'm talking about various peptides that are used as ingredients in ingested dietary supplements or those kinds of things. So there's going to be movement there. I expect a lot of discussion. I think dietary supplements generally are going to get a lot of attention from this HHS. The other thing to keep an eye on, I think, is that the government FDA passed a regulation that allowed states to import drugs from Canada. Florida has a program that's in place, and I think it's worth sort of keeping your eye on that as well. Because it very well could be that there's some other movement. That rule was passed under the first Trump administration, and it was a shocker. I actually did work in that rule, not for the government, but for some of the states, and I was involved very early on the theory of could you bring in products into the United States from, say, Canada, that were originally intended for Canada and now could come into the United States because they're functionally the same drug, made by the same company in the same facilities. They're just in a different label and different package. And I was surprised how fast FDA got that regulation finalized in the first administration. It sort of languished under Biden, but Biden said he was supportive of it. But FDA didn't really do anything about it. I think there was all this talk about cost of drugs. I think there's going to be movement in that space as well.
Okay. And what advice would you give to a business to stay prepared, stay agile during what's shaping up to be a very volatile regulatory year?
Well, come to FDAImports.com and check out the all of the different podcasts. I would certainly encourage that. I also would encourage you to do some research, reading. I would do some regular searches on customs and tariff news. And also FDA news related to the budget, because the budget is it always tells you the policies of what actually can get funded. It's one thing for someone to say, FDA is going to do X, Y, and Z. It's another thing to actually get the money to pay for that, right? That's the budgetary process. Well, the third issue, which is significant, FDA is very resilient. They only have one political appointee. Well, they have RFK, but the RFK is too far removed. They have a commissioner. That's right. So FDA has one political appointee. That's trying to wag a dog because the Food and Drug Administration's got a lot of people, and they have the ability to ruin a commissioner's career. I can tell you right now, right? So it's pretty important to pay attention to what's going on in the budget, because it's going to tell you what Congress thinks that the administration ought to be doing, where the money's going to be. But you want to also be listening to people who sort of know how the field and how the agency tends to think about those kinds of things, what they think about it as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on FDA Imports Cross-Border Compliance. To connect with Benjamin, as he mentioned, visit FDAImports.com. There's all sorts of information on there as well for you to stay up to date with all the things that we've talked about. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel to keep up on the news and keep up on everything that's going on. No one knows more than Ben does. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate your time. It's always great to see you.
Till next time. Thanks very much, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.